So, what's the difference between the internal makeup of an overweight person and someone whose weight is perfectly fine? How can we figure this out? And why do harmful bacteria that help us gain weight appear in the gut? What exactly is the difference between the microflora of an overweight person and someone who isn't? And why do some people lose weight and stay thin while others gain weight, well, basically out of thin air? You could eat air and gain weight. But our weight can be determined not just by calories and willpower, but by millions, billions, and trillions. Ultimately, 2 kilograms of bacteria living inside our gut. And the latest research shows that the composition of the microflora inside the gut isn't just a consequence of obesity from poor diet ruining the microflora, but also one of the key reasons why weight is gained. In other words, it can be the other way around. First, the microflora gets messed up, and that leads to weight gain. And it turns out that an imbalance between gut bacteria can affect how we extract energy from food, how we store fat, and what our appetite is like. There's even an amazing story. If you take a mouse with an obesity problem and transplant its microflora into a thin mouse, the thin mouse will start gaining weight, even without changing its diet. Meaning, from the exact same food, it will be able to extract more energy and, as a result, gain weight. So, what's the difference between thin microflora and fat microflora? The difference turns out to be in the ratio of different types of bacteria. And the main ratio is between Firmicutes and Bacteroidetes. These are the two main dominant types of bacteria in the gut. And in people who are overweight, Firmicutes tend to predominate, while in thin people, Bacteroidetes are more prevalent. Why is this important? Because Firmicutes extract calories and energy from food much faster and more efficiently. Furthermore, they do this from complex carbohydrates and dietary fiber. And essentially, a person with more Firmicutes will get 10 to 15% more energy from the same food than someone with thin microflora. And the second main conclusion from the research is that the strength of microflora lies in its diversity. And that's why thin microflora, the kind that doesn't lead to weight gain, is characterized by high diversity. What does that mean? It means there are more different types of bacteria in our intestinal zoo. But an obese microflora has reduced diversity, meaning there are fewer species within it. It's kind of like a zoo. You go to a zoo and you see there's only an antelope and a giraffe. Well, that's not interesting. And it's not interesting for the gut either. So when diversity is that low, weight is gained faster and inflammation occurs more easily. But if the zoo is diverse, you go in and there are lions, monkeys, maybe 10 types of gorillas, and lots of different birds, then that kind of diverse microflora, a good zoo, gains less weight and is less prone to inflammation. But the amazing thing is that even some bacteria from the Firmicutes genus can digest the dietary fibers that humans can't digest themselves. And they digest them so well that short-chain fatty acids are formed. Then they enter the bloodstream and are used as an additional source of energy. So literally, a person with a lot of Firmicutes will gain weight even from a salad, specifically because of their bacteria. But how does this happen? And why is it that bacteria control our weight at all? Well, first of all, it's energy regulation. And as I said, some bacteria, which are super digesters, extract more energy from the same food than other types of bacteria. The second point is, of course, inflammation. We know that inflammation always makes the intestinal wall looser, more fluid, and leaky. And this allows bacterial substances, or lipopolysaccharides, to enter the bloodstream, then the liver, and cause fatty liver disease and insulin resistance. All of this, of course, further contributes to weight gain. Besides that, there's also a third point. Gut bacteria produce substances that directly affect our brain. These are short-chain fatty acids, acetate, propionate, butyrate. They affect the feeling of fullness and insulin sensitivity, and you just want to eat more. And the second important substance is GABA, gamma aminobutyric acid. It can actually reduce both stress and anxiety, which often lead to overeating. And there's data, this is the fourth important point, that gut microbes can influence our taste preferences and food choices, affect taste receptors, and make us mostly eat the food that's good specifically for the survival of those bacteria or yeast in the gut. And this has been shown. By the way, there was a very interesting study on twins, because twins are genetically identical and their digestive systems are the same. But there are twins where one of them gets fat while the other doesn't and just can't seem to gain any weight. And so they compared their microbiome, and it turned out that in the case of twins, not even genetics or anything else matters, but it's specifically the gut bacteria that affect weight gain or loss. So what turns our normal, lean microbiome into a damaged and fat microbiome? The main enemies on this path, of course, are ultra-processed foods, or what we call convenience foods. Sugars, animal fat substitutes, low-fiber foods, and processed convenience products. And convenience foods, by the way, don't just include the frozen stuff we see in the grocery store freezer, but also products with a long shelf life. For example, most baked goods or, say, some cookies or little muffins. They also, despite the sugar, contain many substances that make these products ultra-processed and are the main killers of our healthy microbiome. This kind of food both supports inflammation by stimulating bacteria that can cause it and destroys the beneficial microbiome. Another important point is, of course, antibiotics. Because antibiotics, especially broad-spectrum ones rather than targeted ones, essentially carry out a carpet bombing of the entire gut microbiome, indiscriminately destroying both good and bad bacteria. And the use of antibiotics in childhood, when the microbiome is still forming, is particularly critical. Then it can form incorrectly, and a fat microbiome will develop right away, and then the child will gain weight instantly. Artificial sweeteners are also very important. There are so many of them, and not just in pure form. For example, there's aspartame, sucralose, saccharin, which seem calorie-free, but are essentially either superalcohols or specific substances. They affect the composition of the microbiome and change the makeup and metabolism of gut bacteria. Well, they're also added to various foods or even chewing gum. For instance, a child chews gum, it has a lot of sweetener, and that way he changes his gut microbiome and then gains weight. Right. And another important point is, of course, the lack of fermented foods, because if there aren't enough and we don't add new microbiome to our gut, new ones, then our old one gradually degenerates and only 1 or 2 types of beneficial bacteria remain in the zoo. That's why you always need to refresh your microbiome. If a fat microbiome has already grown and we want to grow a lean one to lose weight and not get fat from salads, then we need to consider a few practical steps. They actually seem quite simple. They just need to be implemented and done. And so let's come up with the first step. The first step based on research results. And the best news is that in just a few days, you can change your microbiome through diet, turning it from fat to thin. This, of course, involves adding probiotics. But it's better to get probiotics from food rather than from pills or supplements. And then the microbiome that helps us will naturally be selected. Even better is adding prebiotics because they help us nourish the microbiome that loves these foods. So knowing which microbes we need, we can choose a diet form that feeds only them. And here, of course, dietary fiber is number 1. It's not digested by us, but feeds only the microbiome. And it's best to look for the right dietary fiber in asparagus, onions, garlic, chicory, Jerusalem artichokes, green bananas, oats and oatmeal, apples, beans, and lentils. I've already listed 10 products. Let's go over them again. Asparagus, onions, garlic, chicory, Jerusalem artichokes, bananas, oats, apples, beans, lentils, legumes basically. And you should consume, well, at least 30 grams of fiber a day from these foods. I'll remind you that the weight of the product is not equal to the weight of the fiber. Fiber is only a component of these foods. So it would be good if at least 300 to 350 grams of your daily food were vegetables. Then we'll get the necessary amount of fiber to nourish our microbiome. And of course, it would be good to combine this with probiotics. So prebiotics are that very feeding I mentioned. And probiotics are those very live beneficial bacteria. And the champion of bacteria is, of course, kefir, because one small glass contains 200 billion bacteria. And that's a sufficient number to help us restore the microbiome. The only thing is, we can drink a glass of kefir once or twice a day. But by no means should you finish the whole bottle. Why? Because then we'll get too many bacteria, and that can lead to bloating, gas, or even loose stools. Where else can you look for regular, normal probiotics? In yogurts, but only those yogurts that are sugar-free. You can look in sauerkraut, kimchi, or kombucha, and fermented products, besides probiotics as food for our microflora and prebiotics, we need to diversify our diet, because if we add more different plant-based products, then there's more diverse food for the bacteria, and then the microflora itself also becomes more diverse. So it's desirable, and based on research results, it's recommended to consume about 30 different types of plant food. It seems like a crazy number. However, we include here not only vegetables and fruits, but also nuts, seeds, grains, legumes, spices. That is, there should be a lot of all varieties of plant products. Well, and even if we follow this rule, at least partially, it'll still contribute to a greater variety of microflora in our gut. Well, sometimes, by the way, periodic fasting, intermittent fasting, allows to create critical conditions for bacteria. And then only the bacteria that we need remain. Therefore, from time to time, periodic intermittent fasting will have a positive effect on the microflora. Just like, by the way, coffee, because it stimulates the growth of a certain type of bacteria in the gut. By the way, red wine, well, in moderate amounts also has polyphenols. So maybe this will be a solution for many to diversify their microflora. The main thing is not to overdo it, so as not to get an excess of sugar and alcohol too. But scientific developments are moving in this direction. And, personalized probiotics and targeted probiotics are already available now, which are aimed at a specific task. That is, specially bred bacteria that allow either to evict some bacteria from the gut, or to settle others, or to have some specific metabolic effect. For example, there are special probiotics for excess weight, for depression, for autoimmune diseases, for Parkinson's disease, for autism. Such ones have already been bred. There are also developments in microflora transplantation. And when microflora from a thin person is transplanted to a person with excess weight, they actually start to lose weight. There's a very high probability of taking microflora from the wrong person and transplanting it to another person along with, in quotes, beneficial bacteria, also some harmful viruses or some harmful bacteria or something else. Today, we can perform a full-scale microbiome analysis and identify 1,500 species of bacteria in our gut. This is done through microbiome sequencing. And such analyses allow us to study the composition in detail and change it precisely. Because knowing the full composition, we can choose which foods to eat to feed the right bacteria, not just by guesswork, but with mathematical precision. Or which probiotics and prebiotics a specific person needs to change the composition of their microflora. And a fairly important point, of course, is the influence of sleep and stress. Sleep is essential because it also has a negative impact on the microflora as high cortisol levels affect the condition of the gut. The gut becomes more permeable. There were studies conducted in Belgium. Tim Van Owitzel compared what happens if we, for example, take some harsh pill that destroys the gut. or just sleep poorly, or say, give a public speech. And it turns out that the stress level correlates directly. The more stress, the worse the situation in the gut with permeability, and as a result, with the microflora. So, an important conclusion: our gut is our internal garden, and what we sow there, we shall reap. And in the future, and even now, the approach to managing our weight isn't just about counting calories and eating this or that product. No, it's also about changing the gut microflora in a way that supports a healthy weight, a good mood, extends brain activity, and maintains high energy levels. And as usual, we have some provocative questions and some plans. Well, let's put it this way. What do you think? Now that we know there are certain bacteria that contribute to obesity, like Akkermansia, Firmicutes, and Bacteroidetes, do you think obesity and excess weight are contagious then? Well, not in any classical sense, like you shook hands with someone who didn't wash them and caught these bacteria from them. No, I mean that in a sense, if someone has these bacteria, they definitely pass them on. And maybe if you eat with someone who has an obese microflora and adopt their eating habits, then through that same diet, you're feeding the same microbes in yourself as they have. And then it's like a family story. We all eat the same food together, but one person's microflora got messed up and they started eating food to feed those specific harmful microbes. Everyone else follows their lead, and this kind of eating habit leads to weight gain for everyone else. Let me know what you think about this. Have you ever tested your gut flora? How did you try to change it, and what were the results? We'll discuss this in future videos. Now, let's quickly put together a 1-week plan for cultivating a lean microbiome, or a weight loss friendly one. To start, let's add one fermented food item per day. It could be a glass of kefir before bed, or say a spoonful of sauerkraut with mashed potatoes at lunch. Second, let's pick 2 different fruits or 3 different vegetables every day. For instance, a cucumber for breakfast, maybe a carrot for lunch, and something else for dinner, like a tomato. There you go. That's 3 different veggies and 2 fruits already. For a snack, have an apple and a pear, or maybe a plum and an apricot. See, it's actually not that hard to throw this together. You can just pop into any store and grab them. But you should decide what you want first, so you're not wandering around trying to choose, because when you shop spontaneously, you always end up picking the same old things. Step 3, let's temporarily swap out white bread and rice for whole grain alternatives. And fourth, let's add some nuts or seeds to your diet. In a salad or maybe a smoothie. Some might add flax seeds, others chia, walnuts, or even, I don't know, pistachios or something else. And these are already concrete steps toward improving your gut flora. And for dinner, let's make a pureed vegetable soup and add some onion or garlic to it. So my final thought is this: the most modern diet isn't really a diet at all. It's more like internal organic farming, where we're trying to grow the right flora in our own inner gut garden. Our goal isn't to starve ourselves, but to feed the good bacteria in our gut. And in return, they'll reward us with faster weight loss. I think it's a compelling approach. Be sure to leave a comment and follow me on all social media, especially since I post different content on each platform. And I'll see you again soon.